for a few weeks now, and now is the time to really get into the details. Important decisions await the Grizzlies when it comes to several members of the roster, and not just for the upcoming season 2022-2023, but also for many seasons beyond, to give the Grizzlies the best chance to be the ones who are still playing at this point in time in future seasons. That and much more as Damichael Cole makes his return to RockAuto Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gotcha. Welcome to the RockAuto Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you're having a great start to your Tuesday. Hope everybody had a safe, long, definitely enjoyable weekend. And I am thrilled to have back co-host of the show, Damichael Cole, who took a much-deserved vacation. And all joking aside, this show is at its best when the Locked On Grizzlies listeners have the benefit of both perspectives. Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal at Damichael C. Welcome back, sir.
What's going on, Shawn? It's been a while. It's been a while. But it's also good to see you, roll out the red carpet and give me my well-deserved flowers. Shawn, I deserve the good things that you just said, not that slander that you gave me before the intro. We're past that, Shawn. You see what I bring to the table now. Give me my flowers, and we'll be fine.
Yeah, I hope your laptop doesn't work for the next full week straight. You can find Damichael at Damichael C on Twitter, myself at StatsSAC. Damichael for the Commercial Appeal, myself, the words over at Grizzly Bear Blues, your co-host here at Locked On Grizzlies, your Grizzlies every day. And as I mentioned in the opening segment, we have plenty to discuss, but I want to use this show to give an overview of the players who likely have the most important decisions about their futures coming up this summer. Let's break it down a bit. Everybody knows that the NBA rosters have 15 players on them, and here's my opinion right now of where we stand. We know that there are 4 players who are either under multi-year contracts, will be under multi-year contracts, what have you, and I consider them the core 4 right now moving forward. That's Ja, that's Desmond, that's Jaren, and that's Zaire Williams. That's the core 4 right now for this Grizzlies team. Beyond that, there's another supporting cast group of players who are under multi-year contracts that are more of the bench unit. You've got DeAnthony Melton, John Conchar, Xavier Tillman, and who else am I missing? Santi Aldama. Those guys are under multi-year contracts, are more of your future bench unit. You've got Jarrett Culver, you got Killian Tilly at the very end of the bench, but that leaves 5 players, Damichael Cole, who we need to discuss because they've got a lot on their future, either as free agents or expiring contracts. That is Tyus Jones, Kyle Anderson, Steven Adams, Brandon Clarke, and Dillon Brooks. That is correct, in my opinion. And I think that it is perfectly fine if Dillon Brooks considers himself a member of the core 4. No slander to him at all. But I do think that when it comes to decisions to be made for this Grizzlies roster moving forward, to me, Zaire Williams has more value moving forward to the Grizzlies than Dillon Brooks does at this point in time.
Yeah, and Shawn, I when you said it, the core 4, and you said Zaire Williams' name, I had to, make sure I heard that right because, I've been on this train for a while that, Zaire Williams is one of those players who you expect to take that jump, not just for the Grizzlies, just in the NBA next season. And when I say jump, everyone's not going to double their points per game, like Desmond Bane did. And Desmond Bane's a much older guy, more well-rounded body and all those things. Zaire Williams, you could just see his second half numbers as a starter, 13 points per game, and get an idea for him, 37% three-point shooting as well. You got all those things from the second half, Zaire Williams. If you get that, I see no problem with Zaire Williams taking that jump into, that core 4 territory. So I think it's a logical thing to say. It's just funny to hear someone else say it because I've always felt like I was more on a limb with that, that Zaire Williams could be a starter for the Grizzlies next year in his second season as a 20-year-old. And, you think about what all he needs to add to his game. The main thing for him is strength. I mean, everything else is going to come in time, but if he gets stronger, he continues to shoot at 37% from 3-point range and 13 points per game, 14 points per game, anywhere in that range, that is a huge bonus for the Grizzlies. But you mentioned it. It's just weird hearing core four and not having the name Dillon Brooks in it, because what we saw it even from him, Shawn. He would basically tell us towards the end of the season, he's always viewed himself as a core four member. So him sort of in our minds, at least, and like you said, and there's no disrespect to Dillon here. We're just, laying it out on the table. He's kind of being pushed out of that core four territory in with a younger guy, with a lot of talent. And he was drafted top 10 for a reason. So in his place in Zaire Williams. But Dillon Brooks has always viewed himself as a core four member towards the end of the season. I remember when John Morant got hurt, Desmond Bane was dealing with the back soreness, and I asked Dillon Brooks a question just about, how they were going to work things out going forward. And he had an interesting answer when he basically talked about, it's me and Jaren's time. We're the four guys who are supposed to get things done. And he was talking about that core four group who Grizzlies fans have been, throughout the season. That is who we recognize as the core four. But I agree, there is kind of a shifting happening right now. And we will see, over the course of everything plays out. And we're going to talk about that later in the show, too, about Dillon Brooks. We'll see if the Grizzlies still think he's a member of that core four, too.
Well, you know what? Just for the flow of the show, Damichael, and I don't mean to throw this curveball to you, but let's just go right into Dillon right now. 1 year, $11 million left on his contract. And the whole purpose of bringing these players up is not just talking about their contract right now. It's talking about their long-term contract as well. When I look at Dillon Brooks, Damichael, I look at a player who probably thinks that when he is at his best, he is a 4-year, $75 to $80 million player on his next contract. And with the defensive ability that he has, also with the scoring that he can, perform at when he's going good. Sure, that is a good level for that type of player, but you don't always get that type of player. That's what is so at times frustrating about Dillon Brooks. So when it comes to Dillon Brooks, his place on this team, I will say this now, and I believe this, and I am as sincere as I possibly can get. The Grizzlies, in the final evolution of themselves with this core, they need a player like Dillon Brooks. Look at the player that Boston has in Marcus Smart. Look at the player that the Warriors have in Andrew Wiggins. I'm not saying that Dillon Brooks has the ceiling of either of those two players, but what I am saying is that if you need a defensive stopper that you can say, go stop the other team's best player on the perimeter and get us a series win, Dillon Brooks can be that guy. He is the best option right now to be that guy, and he's done it at times. He did it at times during the Timberwolves series. He did it at times for the Warriors series. So Dillon Brooks definitely has a spot on future versions of this Grizzlies team. But if that's at 4 years, $75 million, 4 years at $80 million, the Grizzlies are going to need Dillon to be like he was in Game 6 against the Timberwolves versus how he was when he was taking 25 to 30 shots and basically 8 to 10 of those were turnovers on offense. That's what it comes down to when it comes to Dillon Brooks. And at the end of the day, if you can get him for $15 million per year, go with it all day long. But if you're getting close to that $20 million a year mark after this season, I start to have my doubts of it making sense.
Yeah, because you're talking about a Desmond Bane extension. You've already paid Ja, Jaren. The center position is very expensive in the NBA in terms of not max contract expensive, but you're not going to get too many, really valuable centers under $10 million, as we see Steven Adams over $17 million a year in this upcoming year. We're going to talk more about him as well. But yeah, so the center position, you're going to have to, pay up, at least if you're trying to get a real good one. You can go get one of those rim running guys, maybe, mid-level exception, maybe a vet minimum guy, Bismack Biyombo type guy. But if you want someone, who's going to lead the league in something a la Steven Adams, or who's going to really set the tone in terms of impacting the scouting report, you're going to pay at that center position. So when you factor all that in, yes, the book in terms of keeping, Dillon Brooks may become a little bit bare overall, but we'll talk more about that. But the thing is, Shawn, it's nothing against him. We've kind of just said this. It's more just because he's at the position on the team right now. You look at the entire Grizzlies roster, he's at the position with the young guy who is positioned to take that rise. And in any business, it's a business, right? This is a business decision. You got a cheaper option who you won't expect there to be much drop off, as we saw during the regular season when the Grizzlies went on their long winning streak and they went on some good streaks in February. Zaire Williams was in those starting lineups with Ja, Desmond Bane, Steven Adams, and Jaren Jackson Jr. He was the starting small forward while the Grizzlies made their ascension up the Western Conference. So there's proof in the pudding there as well. And you're talking about him being a better player next season. So you have reason to believe those things. But at the end of the day, Dillon Brooks is very valuable. Like you said, I think those Marcus Smarts, those Patrick Beverley defenders, a lot of teams have them. A lot of teams have those defenders. If he's not there, you wonder who that guy can become for the Grizzlies. So that's definitely a big-time question if he's not there. But it proves his value as well. So it's just the Grizzlies are in that situation where they have a lot of guys who need money, and they're going to have to determine who they want to pay.
In the NBA, at the end of the day, if you don't have a player who is the alpha wing, who is your top one or two in terms of being a player on a team that you consider to be a championship contender, every team at least has to have a supporting cast member who adds consistent positive value on both ends of the court. Dillon does that on the defensive end. At times, he's not doing that on the offensive end. Is he capable of the consistency that you need from that type of wing for this Grizzlies team to win a title? I absolutely think he does. But will he get there? And are you willing to pay him $20 million per year to get there in the future? That's a big question. I'm not necessarily convinced the answer is a clear yes for the Grizzlies. But we'll break that down as we get further into the offseason. Right now, it's the general overview, and we got several more players to discuss. But before we do that, I want to talk with you a bit more about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a great opportunity for you to be able to night in and night out pick the over-under on several different statistical categories when it comes to your favorite players in different sports. For instance, you could discuss, how many strikeouts Garrett Cole may have for the Yankees, while also looking at in the NBA Finals how many threes that Steph Curry may have. And the great thing is that it's you versus numbers. That's all it is. You can make entries in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. And for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of its users. Users get $50 for free if a player in their first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you must use the promo code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer only for Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the promo code NBA for free, and if a player in your PrizePicks entry scores a single point, you get it done. PrizePicks, it's a great start for your fantasy day. When it comes to Locked On Grizzlies, we can't thank you enough for making it your first listen of the day. Make NBA Big Board your second listen of the day for all your draft coverage on the Locked On Podcast Network. Start out with Locked On Grizzlies, then go to NBA Big Board when it comes to the Locked On Podcast Network family of podcasts. Thanks so much for being with us here on Locked On Grizzlies. Damichael Cole is back with us, but Dillon Brooks is not the only person, not the only player that important decisions have to be made on. A few free agents this year actually are at the forefront of Grizzlies decisions when it comes to following up the draft on July 1st. And let's start with the player who I think is the more important of the two long-term for the Grizzlies, and that is Tyus Jones. Damichael, Tyus Jones legitimately had one of the arguably a career year, the best scoring shooting season of his career, another historic assist-to-turnover ratio scenario as well. But the one thing that stood out about Tyus Jones this year versus the past, Damichael, is he showed not only could he start, but also he could continue to add value in the playoffs, which really expands his overall value as a player that many different teams would be glad to have.
Yeah. Tyus Jones was so good, and he was good in his own way. We saw a lot of similarities when Ja Morant and Tyus Jones ran their offense in terms of the pace and things like that. But we saw differences in terms of the ball movement. The assist numbers were higher when Tyus Jones was starting. The three-point shooting was better overall as a team when Tyus Jones was starting. We saw all of those things. So he clearly showed that, he's not just some system player who benefited from a system, which is what a lot of people think of those, backup point guards who get put in really good situations like he did. but he showcased it. I mean, we saw them obliterate the Warriors, in that game by 39 points, and they led by much more than that for most of that second half. Tyus Jones has a role, but the thing about it is, how much does he want to be a starter? He told us he wants to be a starter. He actually, and he kind of tried to circle his words back a little bit too, and he said that, I kind of view myself already as a starter, which is understandable for him to say. But at the end of the day, it's it all goes back to what I said earlier about the business decision. This is for anyone, and every Grizzlies fan that I've talked to, I'm sure a lot of the Locked On Grizzlies viewers will agree. If Tyus Jones takes another starting job somewhere, then you understand that. That's business. He got a promotion. He's going to get paid more if he takes a starting job, and he's going to showcase his talent more, whereas he's basically not going to play a lot unless something bad happens to the team's franchise player, which is kind of a weird way of looking at it, but that's the reality. So that's his situation. Kyle Anderson, I think it's a little bit different, Shawn, because he's one of those wings where I think in the NBA, versatile wings who can guard multiple positions are so valuable. And he actually had some good moments in that Golden State series, Shawn.
100%. And the reason why he had good moments is because he was a chess piece that allowed for the Grizzlies to be able to have his length to be able to defend. And I think that certainly mattered. And the other thing that stands out to this is the simple conversation. Listen, we're going to break down these players more in depth in future episodes. We're going to look at each one of them in future episodes. We've discussed Brandon Clarke already. We'll discuss the veterans a bit more. But the thing that stands out to me on the offensive end when it comes to these players is the playmaking. And this is where I think you give the edge a bit towards Tyus Jones than you do Kyle Anderson. Playmaking-wise, across the board, we saw several young Grizzlies improve. Desmond Bane improved. Zaire Williams improved. We saw a lot of younger Grizzlies improve on their playmaking. So it's not necessarily as big of a need as it was once, and especially when it came to Kyle Anderson's playmaking. With Tyus Jones, I think the reason why he becomes a bit more important is because of how good his playmaking is, how good his shooting is, and also how good it is for him to be a spot starter in the point guard role if you need to get Ja Morant a bit of rest. Those are the factors that, to me, separate him from Kyle Anderson a bit. Now, what does that look like? In my opinion, you had Tyus Jones making nearly $8.3 million over the life of his past contract for 3 years with the Grizzlies. You had Kyle Anderson making nearly $9.5 million over his contract. Both of these players are going to be making $10+ million on their next contracts more than likely. It's these type of decisions that you've got to choose one or the other, in my opinion, when you start paying Jaren what you're going to pay him and Ja what you're going to pay him. And at the end of the day, especially with Zaire already in the wings and likely another wing being added in this draft, I think that you have more reason to go to see if you can get a commitment with Tyus Jones than Kyle Anderson.
Yeah, but I'm going to counter you here. Because I agree, we all agree that Tyus Jones is the most important free agent. But there's a business side of this where keeping Kyle Anderson and potentially going in a different direction at backup point guard, it makes sense. Not saying it's the better decision. Make sure that you hear my words correctly here. Not saying that it's the better decision, but it makes financial sense. Let me explain. So when you look at Kyle Anderson, you mentioned all the great things. Kyle Anderson is the only player on this Grizzlies team who we saw consistently be matched up against a guy like Steph Curry, be matched up against a guy like DeMar DeRozan, who he guarded in the final possession of a game, shut him down, be matched up against guys, like Karl Anthony Towns at center, be matched up against LeBron James. Those are all different styles of players, different positions. Kyle Anderson is a chess piece. Like you said, he's a guy who you can throw on any type of guy. He has those long arms. He's very active defensively. He's a big part of this wreaking havoc defense. Point being, there aren't going to be a lot of those guys in free agency. Backup point guard, there will be some good options. The starting point guard market is dry. But just some names, DeLon Wright. I mean, Grizzlies fans, You know, you remember the stretch he had in Memphis. If you don't remember the stretch, if you need more recency here, go look at that last game where the Hawks played the Grizzlies. Dillon Wright started at point guard for the Hawks in that game. They beat Memphis. He played really, really well. Corey Joseph is a guy that I like. You know, he's not going to, do the flashy things like a Tyus Jones, and he can't really shoot well and all of that. But defensively, Corey Joseph gets after it. And having him as a pit bull at the point of attack, that's a player out there. Dennis Schroeder, non-Bird Right player. Oh, Shawn, you just cracked a smile. Oh, but I'll let you get to it. But Dennis Schroeder is another guy out there who we seen, 2 years ago. Only 2 seasons ago, Shawn, this was a guy who was in the 6th man of the year. He was an elite 6th man just a couple years ago. So you got a guy like Dennis Schroeder. You got Dillon Wright, who Grizzlies fans should know well, and he had a really good game against Memphis. He had a really good season, actually. And there are a couple other options out there, depending on how you want to do it. You have Rajon Rondo, is going to be available out there. Goran Dragic in Brooklyn, who I think in the right role, right team, that's another super big pickup. I think those are all quality guys. Goran Dragic 2 seasons ago was averaging 17, 18 points a game. He is proven in his career he's a better scorer than a guy like Tyus Jones, with all due respect to Tyus Jones. And then we've mentioned, Rajon Rondo, who is just an all-time table setter. He's an NBA champion. We just mentioned Dillon Wright, Dennis Schroeder. I think at the end of the day, there are more options where you say, hey, Tyus Jones' number's too high. You can go get one of those guys, $7-8 million a year, save yourself some money, bring back Kyle Anderson, and you still keep that defensive wing piece, because you mentioned the rookies and things like that. At the end of the day, we know there aren't a lot of Herb Jones growing on trees. It's going to be a super big task to get a rookie who can come in and play this type of defensive style that the Grizzlies, play on the wing. Rookies have a lot of defensive, growth. We saw it with Zaire Williams. We saw games where he guarded Steph Curry and he looked good. We saw games where he was benched in the 4th quarter against D'Angelo Russell in the regular season, and they went with John Conchar instead. Point being, Tyus Jones is the best free agent. Yes, he's the most valuable free agent. But if you want to look at it from a financial perspective, it makes a little bit of sense. If his number gets too high, say, okay, Dennis Schroeder is a former 6th man, the year type player. Rajon Rondo's an NBA champion. And all these guys, you have options out there, Shawn.
Your point is extremely valid, and it is also a very astute, and this is why I love having these conversations with you, because you're absolutely correct, 100%. I do think that the wiser investment for the Grizzlies is likely Tyus Jones over Kyle Anderson. However, to your point, it's probably easier to find a acceptable replacement for a Tyus Jones than a Kyle Anderson. And as good as Tyus Jones was with his shooting and overall helping out without Ja, if you have Ja in the playoffs like you hope to in the future, the length and overall intelligence of Kyle Anderson on defense, that becomes more valuable than Tyus Jones. And the other thing that stands out is this. This is why I think the NBA draft, I think it's going to be a very big indication of what the Grizzlies potentially look to do with these free agents. If you see the Grizzlies pick a Kennedy Chandler from Tennessee, it probably doesn't make sense for them to extend Tyus and pick Kennedy Chandler. I'm not saying that it can't happen. I'm just saying, to me, that would be a good indication of what they're leaning towards. But to your point, if you put the two in a vacuum, I think Tyus is the better long-term investment. But who's harder to replace? It's definitely Kyle Anderson. So your point is valid. But at the end of the day, if you extend both those players, or you give Kyle Anderson more than $10 million per going forward, that to me makes it even more of an interesting conversation when it comes to Dillon Brooks. That's the other thing that stands out about this. What happens with Tyus, what happens with Kyle Anderson, it's going to impact what happens a year from now, when you've got to talk rookie contract extension with Desmond Bane, and you also got to talk long-term contract with Dillon Brooks once again. They're all intertwined. But those aren't the only players who you have contract talks going on with. When it comes to the front court, there are some pretty important players that me and Damichael have both been pretty vocal about. We'll discuss both those players in just a moment. Before we do, I want to talk with you about RockAuto.com. Now, the great thing about it is that RockAuto.com is a place for you to go no matter what you need, no matter the car part that you need or the year, make, and model of the car that you're looking to get car parts for. RockAuto.com is going to have it. This has been a family-owned business. They've been in business for over 20 years. They know that car parts typically fall out of budget. So they try their best to be cost-effective for you. When you visit RockAuto.com, let them know the Locked On Podcast Network sent you. RockAuto.com, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the car parts you'll ever need. Visit RockAuto.com today. On tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we're going to talk a bit more about the Grizzlies' younger players. Looking at the veterans that we're talking about right now, what about many of the young players that we mentioned? Some players who may not have contributed that much, but if there are minutes to be gained, who could step up and stand out next year? We'll look at that on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. But let's get to another fun conversation. And we're going to talk about two players who are going to be on expiring contracts next year, Brandon Clarke as well as Steven Adams. And here's the thing, Damichael, that Locked On listeners will tell you. I just tweeted about it before we started the show. Besides Zaire Williams, you take Ja, you take Jared, you take Bane, you take Zaire. You put them to the side. The fifth most important player going forward for this Grizzlies core is Brandon Clarke. And the reason why is because he showed the difference maker he could be at times in the playoffs.
I agree. That part, I agree with you, Shawn. He is a difference maker. He was a difference maker as a rebounder. He was a difference maker in terms of being able to switch out into those smaller guards when the Grizzlies needed it. And the guards couldn't attack him the same way they did, with Steven Adams and things like that. He is a difference maker. But where I don't agree just quite yet, I've mulled this over for a few days. I don't know, Shawn. The contract extension right now, when I say I don't know, I don't even know if it makes sense for him to sign it right now, let alone the Grizzlies. Maybe it makes more sense for not for Kyle Anderson, for Brandon Clarke to get that, financial stability over the next 4 years, maybe get $50 million, $60 million. But for the Grizzlies, I think you want to see more consistently. You want to see something else. What we see from Brandon Clarke is he has a great floater. He has he's a great athlete, and you want to see what more can he add to his offensive game. We saw, he had a bounce back season. When a player has a bounce back season, typically you want to bet on them, but let's say, hey, let's see if he can do it twice in a row. Let's make sure, what we saw last season is what we're going to get next season too. And he's restricted at the end of the day next year, which is tough for a player in his position, because this is the toughest part about it. A player like him, you don't want to get to restricted free agency because he's not an automatic max player. He's the type of player where another team can come in and outprice you, put you in a bad situation. Think of a guy like Jeremy Lin when the whole Linsanity thing was going on, and he was a restricted free agent, and the Knicks were like, oh, we're going to re-sign him without a doubt. And then the Rockets come in and they throw this insane amount of money at him, and the Knicks are like, look, there's nothing we can do about that. That's the situation that he could be in next offseason. If he plays out of his mind, someone may say, here, $100 million, Brandon Clarke. And the Grizzlies are, no way. We already got Jaren. We got to get this Desmond Bane extension done. So it's a tough situation, but I really don't know if you extend him at this point, because you need to see more. If you give him $60 million right now, and we're just throwing numbers out there, if you give him $60 million, the thing is, what if he regresses back to the season, last season, and now, that's $15 million attached to his name that you're not probably going to be able to get rid of easily. And you have to give Desmond Bane his extension, who's proven to be, probably the most consistent player this season outside of Ja Morant. So it's a tough situation, but I think maybe for Brandon Clarke, it makes more sense to say, hey, let him pursue the extension because he just had a big year. Capitalize on that big year, get your money while you can. But from the Grizzlies, if I was in that front office, and this is probably why I'm not in the front office too, Shawn, because I know you're on the side of giving him that money, I would just be like, hey, he talked about adding a three-pointer next year. Let's see what that's about. He has the floater. What else can he add besides the floater outside of offensive rebound, putbacks, and things like that? What can he do off the dribble a little bit more? What else is in the bag before we say, oh, yeah, this is the guy we want to pay that much money to, as more than likely a backup center at that. He's not a starter right now. So I mean, he plays a lot of minutes in the postseason. In the regular season, he was only around 19 minutes a game. 15 million a year, 12 million a year, all of that double-digit money like that is a lot of money to give, not to just a backup guard, a backup big man who are just paid less than guards these days.
No, and your point about his offensive game, I think, is valid. But here is why, and without question, if I were the Grizzlies, I would give him that 4-year, $50 million mark. I use Wendell Carter. I use Robert Williams.
Yeah.
That is kind of a, hey, was it really worth giving it to him in Wendell Carter's case versus, my goodness, would a bargain when it comes to Robert Williams' case. I'm not saying that Brandon Clarke is going to be Robert Williams. I don't think he has that potential. He's older. I don't know if he has that defensive upside. But here's the big key for me, Damichael, on giving Brandon Clarke this extension. It's the defensive side of the ball. In the playoffs, we saw plenty of times where he was left on an island against a quicker, smaller player, and he did just fine. I remember several possessions where against Anthony Edwards, he limited Edwards from being able to get a good look. It led to great opportunities. I will say this. He made nowhere near the impact against the Warriors that he did against the Timberwolves, but he still provided valuable minutes at times. And here's the big key, the big key. You've already made the investment in Jaren Jackson Jr. Make the investment in a player that you know complements him in multiple ways. When Clarke and Jaren Jackson Jr. were on the court together, the Grizzlies were consistently playing among the best defenses or playing like one of the best defenses in the NBA. And to the point that you made several times in the playoffs, if Jaren Jackson Jr. is injured or he's limited because of foul trouble, Brandon Clarke is a very suitable guy to come in. And I'm not saying you definitely don't have the potential of a Jaren Jackson Jr., but you also don't necessarily lose that much. I know the three's not there, but the defensive impact that he makes, the rim protection plus the offensive rebounds that he adds, it minimizes the non-existent three-point part of his game right now. So with that being said, I still would without hesitation give him the 4 years, $50 million or so because of how well he complements Ja as a lob threat, how well him and Jaren connect on the defensive side of the ball, and the insurance policy he is to Jaren as being that guy who could complement him even potentially in closing lineups moving forward. But the other player beyond that comes to mind is Steven Adams. 1 year, $17.5 million left to play. I think that Steven Adams most certainly is in play as a money-matching aspect of a trade this summer. But Damichael, I also think that we talk about Brandon Clarke being a long-term complement to Jaren Jackson Jr. I also could see the Grizzlies potentially valuing what Steven Adams did for Jaren during the regular season, helping him keep healthy, helping him focus on his defense to break out on that side of the ball. Where does Steven Adams offer more value? As a potential trade piece or potentially being a part of this Grizzlies team beyond this season?
Yeah, it's another tough situation. He has a lot of value as a trade piece. You talk about that $17 million and how you can match salaries and you can go get a guy, really good players out there. But I'm of the mind. I mean, you almost let him play this season out. You don't have to get something back for Steven Adams unless if there's a big trade to be made out there. If there's no big trade to be made out there, you let him play this season out, and maybe you scan the big man market elsewhere for next season because Steven Adams' price is going to be so expensive. And at the end of the day, you're not going to commit. I don't think the Grizzlies are. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't see the Grizzlies commit $30 million to two centers. And that's the situation they could potentially be put in if you're paying Steven Adams $15 million a year, maybe, and Brandon Clarke $13 million a year. That's $28 million, committed to two centers on top of Jaren Jackson, on top of Desmond Bane, a potential extension coming next summer, on top of Ja Morant's potential extension that he's going to sign this summer, kicking in next year. It's going to be really tough to pay both of those guys. So I don't see Steven Adams as just a long-term part of this because, money-wise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe that's a position, we talk about where the Grizzlies can draft. I'm actually going to talk about that. Maybe that's a position that they address because you get a guy and you sit him this season, let him learn the ropes. And then when Steven Adams is gone, you're ready to put him kind of like Robert Williams. You mentioned Robert Williams. That was the situation he was put in, with the Celtics. Now he had some other off the court issues and things like that. But when he was given that start opportunity, he ran with it. So I think that's the situation. You mentioned him as a trade piece. You package him. We mentioned Dillon Brooks. If you were to package those contracts, you're talking $29 million. You know what type of player 29 million gets you in the NBA? Gets you some really good players, Shawn. So it's definitely in the conversation, but I think you're very selective with that process because this is the guy who just set the offensive rebounding record for the Grizzlies. It was a big reason why they led the league in offensive rebounding. You don't just throw him to the side. If anything, you let him play out this season, see how he liked this time in Memphis, and maybe he re-ups for a cheaper deal or something like that. But I think you take your chances there more than just, hey, he's in an expiring contract. He's making a lot of money. Let's just throw him to the side because at the end of the day, he's a valuable part of this team.
And there's fun precedent here, right? Because going into last offseason, the Grizzlies had a center on an expiring contract coming off the best value of his career in Jonas Valanciunas, and they wound up cashing that in, trading him for obviously Steven Adams. You've put value in putting an established veteran center next to Jaren. It helped allow for him to break out and for him to be healthy all season long. There is value in that. But do you feel that that value could be replaced easier with trading Steven Adams or letting him walk than potentially paying him for $15 million more? At the end of the day, there's so many different perspectives. Now, instead of one big man going into an expiring contract year, coming off the best year of his career, you've got two. I would think that if you looked at a situation for the Grizzlies that could lead to some type of relevant to significant trade, in my opinion, whether it be draft night or whether it be around free agency, something involving Steven Adams could make sense. I don't think they're trading Brandon Clarke. I think at the end of the day, Brandon Clarke, of the five players that we mentioned, is the most likely and deserves an extension the most. But I do think that the pairing of Steven Adams and Brandon Clarke, with both of them entering an expiring contract year on both their ends, they are two very interesting storylines to watch because I think a trade makes sense for at least one of them. Damichael, anything else you want to add as we end this episode of Locked On Grizzlies?
Shawn, I think this was a great episode. I hope the Locked On Grizzlies viewers agree. This was very insightful stuff. Both of our great perspectives. You get both of us back here. This is when the show is at its best. Shawn, the brilliant mind he is himself, and I try to, just add some type of, just add as well, to that. And we try to give both of our perspectives to really just give a good idea of the outlook on the Grizzlies going forward.
Forgive me as well. It's been, these weather changes have had a weird impact on my allergies, so forgive me as well. But until next time, Shawn Coleman with Damichael Cole. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies.